Good evening. Still got some of our bunch that are sick, and you need to remember them in your prayers. Talked to Jay. He's still struggling quite a bit with pain. So remember Jay in your prayers. He said he is 2 inches taller on the good side, though. So there was a positive to it. All right, this evening we need to start talking about, before we get into this. Okay, words. Words are important. We all know that. Words are the way we convey meaning, convey a message to each other, the way that we communicate. But you know and I know, communication is about way more than words, right? We all know that. For one thing, words mean just, a lot of words have variable meanings, even in our language, right? Certain words we use can mean different things. We understand that. Depends on the context we're using them in. It can be the same word, but it can mean something totally different. The other thing that makes meaning is our syntax, right? How we put words together, how we join our words, the way we use conjunctions, prepositions, adverbs, adjectives, all those things fit into our language. You know, in all this health issue I've been going over, I've had a lot of foreign doctors. I'm not against foreign doctors, not. I've had a few of them that speak pretty good English as far as words. We don't communicate, you know? I mean, they can speak the language, they can tell me the words. We don't communicate because they can't speak Okie, you know? And, and sometimes that's a deal, right? If you can't, it's not just about what we say, it's about how we say it, how we put sentences together, our inflection, how we do. You all know as well as I do that a text message can come off 100% different than what you intended for it to come off. It can sound so mean, harsh. You might not have thought that, but it can sound just like you're just mad at them, And, so we use them emojis, don't we? Like little hearts and smiley faces and stuff, so we can kind of make people know that we're not just mad, We don't really send many shake the fist emojis. Maybe I need one of those. Shake the fist emoji, But we do that because we try to convey meaning. So where do our words, where do words come from? You know what? Where do words originate? Why do we have words? Right? We're always making new words. What's this thing now they do? 7 and 11 or whatever it is kids say now? 6, 7, whatever that means. Yeah. But where do our words, where do words come from? Where do they actually come from? Where does our language actually come from? You ever thought about that?
Well, it's hard to understand it if you go back to the original.
Yeah. Well, that's called etymology, and that's a study, and that deals with words, like where words originate. Most of our English words originate from other languages. A lot of our words are Latin. A lot of our words are Greek. A lot of our words originate in other languages. Like the word sincere. That's one of my favorite. I always throw that out there because it's one of my favorite words. That's from the Latin, sincere, means without wax, right? That's where that word comes from. Sincere means without wax. Always remember that one. That's one of my favorites. But a lot of words we use, that's where they originate from. They come from different languages. And when we move a word from a different languages and we make a new word and we just use that other word, that's what we call transliteration. So like sincere is a Latin for sincere. So what we did was we just used, our English letters in place of the Latin letters, and we just made another word. That's called transliteration. That's what that means. We transliterate it. We move it from one language to another language. That's transliteration. But another way we create words or we make words, some words are just our own. I mean, we just make them up. They're just words that evolve through time, right? And our words change meaning all the time, right? Would you agree with that? You know, when Clyde was young, gay meant happy, right? You know, and even when I was young, gay meant happy, you know, but gay don't mean happy no more. Well, maybe in the right setting, I don't 100% know, but you know what I'm saying. So, you know, our words change. Cool, right? If you say, man, that's cool, you know, that could mean it's cool or it could mean it's neat, I guess, or right? So words can change. So that makes it really hard. So if you go into real early translations of Bible, like the Darby, 1801 Darby, if you've ever read that book, the 1801 Darby edition of the Bible, it is the Bible. I mean, it's English. It's English, but I mean, it's Old English. And if you try to read it, you'll be lost, because I mean, it is Old English, translated in 1801. But if you read that, it will tell you just how much our language has evolved in a couple of hundred years. Crazy how much our language has changed in a couple of hundred years. So the King James was translated when? Does anybody know? King James, authorized King James. No, a little, 1611. King James was translated in 1611. So that's about, what, 4 centuries ago, right? So about 4 centuries ago, King James, that would be authorized King James, was translated, right? And King James was translated into the English by 2 different groups of scholars, one at Cambridge, one at Oxford. One group translated the Hebrew, one group translated the Greek. It was the first Bible that was translated directly to English, directly from the original language. All other Bibles before King James were translated out of the Latin Vulgate. Well, there's a problem with Latin, okay? The big problem with Latin is it doesn't have enough words. It's word short. So you don't have as many words, so it's hard to translate the meaning because you don't have enough words. So that was a problem with Latin. Jerome did the Latin Vulgate. St. Jerome did the Latin Vulgate. And the Catholic Church still uses the Latin Vulgate, did use the Latin Vulgate for centuries. King James come along and said, well, we're going to put it into English, which it had been translated into English before the King James, but it hadn't been translated from the original language into English before King James. So King James was unique. And King James became the benchmark of modern translation. It's what everything, any Bible you read today, it is relying on King James text. I'm just telling you, there's no translation in the world that's not looking back at King James. Because King James still stands as that pinnacle translation. Even though it has some flaws, it's still kind of the mark, the standard that everything kind of flows off of. And the reason I'm telling you this is because I want to tell you about words. So words in the Bible are some words in the Bible are not used other places. Would you agree with that? Some words in the Bible are kind of unique to the Bible, unique to Scripture, right? There's some words in the Bible that they're just not everyday words. They're not words we use every day. They're pretty unique to the Bible. And words like this new thing, 6-7 or whatever, right? We don't know what that means really. I mean, I Googled it. Nobody really knows what that means, I don't think. But eventually, we'll have a definition, right? Eventually, we'll have some definition of that. We call that, what they call that now, the Urban Dictionary or whatever it is. You can Google it, has like new words. But, so we create a word, and the neat thing about creating a word like that word is that if we create it, we can give it whatever meaning we desire. We can say, this is my word, and this is what it means. So we can define it, right? We can create a new word. So what happens is, as King James rolls along, King James is translating the Bible. And so there's a couple of words that King James can't translate, because if he did, people would be like, well, what does that mean, you know? So there's this word in the Greek, it's called ekklesia, is a word in the Greek, ekklesia. And ekklesia in the Greek is a word that means assembly. In the book of Acts, when it says they had the assembly, when they were going to try to get Paul, and they said the assembly, that's ekklesia, that's that word. But the other place that that word is always in the Bible is a word that King James wanted in the Bible, really, 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 really bad. You know what the word was, right? You know what the word is? Church. Why? Why didn't he just want to say assembly? I mean, that's what the word really means, is assembly. I mean, when it says they were added to the church, right? That word's assembly. They were added to the assembly, not church, assembly. Because when we think of church, what do we think about, really? Think about a building or an institution is that right? And that's what King James wanted you to think. He wanted people to think institution. Because when King James translated the Bible in England, what was the state religion of England? Church of England, because they split from the Catholic because of the King George business fiasco. When the King George fiasco or King Henry VIII, when King Henry VIII fiasco came around, they kicked out the Catholic Church. Two reasons they did that. One is because at that time the Spaniards held the Pope captive, and the Pope wouldn't annul Henry VIII's marriage, and he wanted it annulled so he could remarry, because he couldn't divorce, you see, as a Catholic. So he needed his marriage annulled. Well, the Pope wouldn't annul it because he was in Spain, being held by the Spaniards. He wouldn't do it. So that's one reason. He wanted his marriage annulled, and the Catholic Church, the Pope, would not annul his marriage. The other thing is the Catholic Church owned all this land, all this property in England. They owned all this stuff, monasteries and land, and a lot of land was owned by the Catholic Church. So when King Henry kicked him out, the state took all that land. So he had multiple reasons to doing it. It wasn't purely the annulment. They had a lot of land and a lot of influence. And when he did that, then he said, well, I'm going to kick the Catholic Church out. I'm going to make the Church of England. Right? So he makes the Church of England. And the Church of England is the state church. Well, King James didn't want it to say assembly because he wanted the authority to be in the church, Church of England, right? In other words, you're going to be in the church as an institution. If I say assembly to you, if I say, well, it's the assembly of the saved, that kind of opens that up a little bit, because that doesn't necessarily mean church, right? So King James was really animate. And there was even arguments that are recorded that King James had with the translators about that very thing, and they said it needs to be assembly. And he says, no, it's going to be church. I want it to be church. So that's one reason we have that word, church, in the Bible, is because King James was animate. He wanted the authority in the church, Church of England. He wanted that, so he made that happen in that translation. That's a bias, okay? All translations in the world are biased. Just telling you that right now. There's not a translation in the world that's not biased by somebody. Whoever translates the Bible, they want you to believe what they believe. I mean, I'm just telling you. Whoever translates the Bible, they're promoting their doctrine, their theology. So all translations have a certain amount of bias. They do it a lot of times with pronouns. Pronouns are a big thing in translation. He, she, it, that's a big thing, right? How do you use pronouns? Like in the Bible, when it says all of mankind, well, we know what that means. I mean, I think everybody in here, if I say mankind, I think we all know what that means, right? But a lot of newer translations, later translations, are getting away with man. They want people. They want to get rid of those pronouns. You know, they want that pronoun to change. A really good example of that is Romans 8, where if you know that passage, it says the Spirit, and see, this is where the word gets you. On King James, like all modern translations say the Spirit himself intercedes with groanings that can't be uttered. King James says the Spirit itself intercedes with groanings that can't. You say, well, that doesn't mean much, Rex. It absolutely means a lot, because they're conveying a meaning. And whenever I put him or a male gender in front of Spirit, I'm talking about the Holy Spirit. When I don't put a gender in front of the Spirit, then I'm opening it up to be the Spirit. The truth is, the Greek, there's no gender on Spirit. It's a neutral word. It's so there's no gender to that word in the Greek. So every time you read in the Bible and it says like the Spirit himself, or he, or puts that pronoun in there, that male pronoun, what that translator is telling you is he's conveying that to be the Holy Spirit. In the Greek, it doesn't say that. It says the Spirit, which is a definite article in the Greek, which is what they look for, the Spirit. And sometimes it says the Spirit, the good one, but it never puts a male gender on that word, because that word does not have a gender. So, but when we talk about God, we talk about Christ, we talk about the Spirit, we put male gender, right? Male pronouns, because that's the way that we perceive that, right? Male gender. So we put that in there. So that's a big thing. Pronouns are a big thing. But now the other thing is that, and you think that's funny, that itself, himself. If y'all remember Leland Foster when he was here, you remember old Leland Foster that used to come and lived out there so far back in the woods you had to go towards town to hunt, you know what I'm talking about? And he literally argued with me 2 hours one day over that word. It was the longest conversation I ever had over a word in my entire life. But we had a 2-hour conversation over himself and itself in Romans 8:28. That's why I remember that to this day. So that's one thing. But then the other thing is that the other problem, and the other word we're going to talk about right now, is the word baptized, because that word in the Greek literally means what? Immerse. That's the translation, right? That's the translation, immerse. What did the Church of England do at the time King James translated the Bible? Sprinkled, poured. Infants, right? Infant baptism, sprinkled and poured. So what would have happened if they would have translated the Bible and said immersed? Been a problem, right? Because all of a sudden it would have been like, why aren't we doing this? Bible says immerse. We ain't immersing anybody. We're pouring water on their head, sprinkling their head, you know. That's a big problem, right? Do you know, if you ever been through my church history class, you would know this, but you ever heard of the Anabaptists? Anabaptists? The Anabaptists were the first people that I know of that immersed people, immersed adults. They were called the Anabaptists. And that Anabaptist movement wound up being, you got any idea what that wound up being in the United States today, what that is? Quakers, Amish, Mennonite. They all came out of the Anabaptist movement. And do you know in Zurich, when they started to baptize adults, the church condemned that, and they put them to death for baptizing people. They actually killed them for baptizing adults, for immersing adults. They actually killed them for that. So, you know, when you start talking about a word, what's the difference does a word mean? What difference does a word make? Well, be life and death, right? I mean, essentially. So King James said, well, we can't translate this immerse, because if we do and everybody can read it, everybody's going to be going, why aren't we doing this? So can't do that. So he did the same thing we did with the Latin, sincere. He transliterated it. He took the Greek word, baptizo, and he put English letters in it, and he made a new word. And what's the advantage of making a new word? You can provide your own definition, right? So when he meant that as baptized, he said, oh, we're doing that. We're doing that. We're baptizing. That's what we're doing. We sprinkle water or pour a little water over the head. We're baptizing them. So all of a sudden, well, that's okay, you see, because most people, especially in those days, most people couldn't read Greek. And most people didn't have access to it anyway, even if they could read it. And they sure couldn't read Latin. So they were in good shape. The Catholic Church loved the Vulgate, because when the Bible started to get translated in English, they killed people for that. Because they knew as long as they had it in Latin, most people, majority of people, were never going to be able to read it. So they had control, didn't it? The Word of God actually gave them control over people's lives. So translation is the comprehension of the meaning of a text and the subsequent production of an equivalent text. That's a translation, right? Likewise called a translation that communicates the same message in another language. So translation communicates the same message in another language. So Leila's not here tonight, but most of y'all know a little bit of Spanish. So if I said bueno in Spanish, you would know that was what? Good, right? That's translation. You translated that word, right? You just move that word, you give it an English meaning, right? So that's translation, and that's what we like. We like to translate, right? We want to convey the meaning of whatever we're doing. We want to convey the meaning, because you all know if you have a translator working for you, he is not going to, and there's somebody speaking Spanish, and he's translating that into English. You and I both know that translator is not going to quote that Spanish guy word for word, because if he did, we wouldn't understand what the heck he was saying. Am I right? Because y'all have been in the Mexican restaurant, right? Right? And if we're going to order in English, we're going to say, I want a big queso. I want a big cheese, right? Big melted cheese. But you all know if this guy in Spanish is going to say that, he's going to say, you want a what? You want a queso grande. Because we all know, guess what? It's not just about the word, it's about the syntax, right? Because we speak English, we speak a lot different than most other languages, right? We put things in a different, right? In other words, we say the big man, and most languages will say the man, the big one, right? So we speak different. So a translator that's guy speaking Spanish or German or Russian or whatever he's speaking, and that translator, he's not just telling you the words. We all know that. He's not just giving you the words. He's giving you the meaning of what that guy's saying in our language. He's changing the meaning of, he's conveying the meaning, right, into our language. So translation is more than just saying, oh, that word, that word, that word, that word. And that's what gets us in trouble, with me in trouble, and people that want to say, oh, I want to look at the Bible in Greek. Well, if you ever look at a linear Bible, interlinear Bible we call them, that has the English above the Greek, that's a problem, because their syntax is not the same. So you can't, it's not going to make as much sense to you as you think it's going to make to you, is what I'm trying to tell you. You know, it's going to be a little bit ambiguous, right? Because it's not the same. So, but that's what we want to do. But transliteration is a practice of converting a text from one writing system into another in a systematic way. That's what transliteration is. That's what we're doing. We're taking a word in another language, and we're just systematically putting it into English. That's what we're doing, okay? A lot of our words are that way. I know this probably would not interest you, but if you ever want to know what I'm talking about, just pick you some English words, you know, and then go to Google and type etymology of whatever word you're looking at. Just type that, etymology of, you know, cold or whatever word. And if you do that, it's going to go down there and it's going to say, this is the etymology. This word was first used someplace, came from an old Slavic word, or came from a Latin word, or a Greek word, or whatever word. And, you know, it's really interesting to me. It's fascinating to me to kind of see the history of our language, you know, where our language kind of came from. So we're kind of seeing maybe what's going on a little bit here with words and how that it's done. So in Bibles, there's two different types of Bibles, right? In English. We know this, right? Do we know this? There's two different types of Bibles, right? There's translations, right? Which is like most of you use, right? New American Standards, New King James, English Standards, Young's Literals, you know, all these different translations. And there's also kind of what we call paraphrase Bibles, where guys take it and they want to make it where it's just like, supposedly like we can just read it and understand it like it's all like an R-type deal. Those are like NLTs, like New Living, and Bibles like that, New Century, New Living. Those are what we call, they're a paraphrase. In other words, they're a person that takes the Bible and says, you know, I'm going to put it, well, you can look at it for yourself if you ever want to look, but that's a paraphrase. So whenever people quote something like, New Living, New Centuries. There's others I'm not thinking about right now, but there's a bunch of these out there. Whenever you see them quoting that and you go like, I never read that in my Bible, you probably never did. I mean, I'm just, just laying it down on you. It's going to be that different. When you read it, you're going to be like, I never read that. I never read that in my Bible, because it's just that different from anything you've ever read. So we have that. So people take it, translations sometimes very literally, very systematically, very literal, and some translations are the opposite of whatever literal would be. They're very abstract, okay? They're just people that they take it, and you would just have to read it. But if you ever read one, you'll know what I'm talking about, because it's not going to sound like the Bible you read. It's not going to sound like that. So this is transliteration. So we can't confuse these two things, right? Transliteration can't be confused because it involves a change in language. Translation involves a change in language while preserving the meaning. So if we would translated baptizo, that would be immerse. Transliteration performs a mapping from one alphabet into another. It gets a new word that we can put whatever definition we want to on that word, because we're just mapping a different word. That's what we're doing. So this is baptizo. I think this is one of the most interesting. I love this little thing. Every time I read this, I kind of get a kick out of it. I get a kick out of Nicander every time I read this. So this is what this means. This is from a Greek lexicon. So this is the Strong Concordance. Okay, that's what I gave Harold the other day to take home, and he had to get a dolly to wheel it to the car. But it's to cleanse by dipping or submerging, to wash or make clean with water, to wash oneself, bathe, to overwhelm, not to be confused with bapto. The clearest example, so this is interesting. So, you take a language like Greek, and the Bible was written in what's called Koine Greek, which isn't the Greek per se that Greeks use today, okay, Koine Greek. Well, most people say that's really important because Koine Greek is what we call a dead language, okay? English is not a dead language. Why is English not a dead language? Because it's changing all the time. Meanings are changing, evolving. Our language is evolving, right? Matter of fact, if you talk to somebody from 200 years ago, they'd probably be like, what? Right? So that happens. But Koine Greek, according to scholars, was a dead language. And what that means is right after the time of the New Testament, they no longer were using it as a language. So it was dead. So it didn't evolve. So what we can do is we can go back into these Greek texts, these ancient Greek texts like this, Nicander. This is 200 BC, right? So that's 200 years before Jesus, this word. So we can go back into these Greek like recipes and like directions and like all these things. We have a lot of these things. And we can see the context and usage of the word, which gives us an idea of the meaning. Because obviously we can't go back 2,000 years and say, hey, what does this mean? I mean, we don't have a 2,000-year-old Greek dictionary. So we can't go back 2,000 years and say, oh, well, tell us what that word means. And since the Greek today that's used is still an evolving language, still a living language, we can't rely on Greek words today to tell us what that meant 2,000 years ago, because we can't even rely on English 200 years ago, so we can't rely on Greek 2,000 years ago, right? Does that make any sense? So we go back into these things. So this was a recipe from Nicander, who lived 200 years before Jesus. And it was a recipe for making pickles. And it's helpful because it uses both words, bapto and baptizo. Baptizo. So Nicander says that in order to make a pickle, the vegetable should first be dipped, bapto, into boiling water, and then baptized, baptizo, in the vinegar solution. Both verbs concerning the immersing of vegetables in a solution, but the first is temporary, the second produces a permanent change. So we go back to this old stuff, even recipes, and we're like, okay, what did that word really mean? Don't take my word for it. What did that word really mean? So that's part of it. That's part of it, okay? But the other thing is this. The Greeks, the Jews, weren't foreign to the idea of baptism. They did it all the time. Immersion. They immersed all the time. They did it all the time. So when John the Baptist was in the wilderness immersing, right, baptizing, John the Baptist, when I was a really young kid, not very old, 19 years old, and I thought, I'm going to read the Bible through, right? It's one of those things 19-year-old decides to do before internet, didn't have no phone, we just got bored stiff, wasn't a lot of books in the house, I'm going to read the Bible. So I picked the Bible up, start to read it. It's not very long, come across this word, baptize. John is baptizing people in the Jordan River. And I'm like 8 or 9 years old, and I'm sitting there reading this, and I'm like, why do people do that? Why would people just go to the wilderness and let John dunk them in the Jordan River? Why would you do that? Why out of the blue would you just decide I needed to do that? I don't think that's something I would want to do. I don't know why I would do that. It'd be like John the Baptist being at the old North Canadian River and everybody coming down there and getting dunked, Why would you do it? It didn't make any sense to me as an 8 or 9-year-old. I couldn't understand that. Why? Why on earth would people just all of a sudden decide they need to go get baptized in the Jordan River, So years later, when I started studying that, I found out that was really common in Judaism. They did that all the time. They did it in the temple. They did it wherever. That was just a ritual to them. It was a cleansing to them, and it wasn't anything unusual to them. They did that all the time. So when John the Baptist was out there at the Jordan River and teaching repentance and saying, I'm going to baptize you, to immerse you, right, is what he was saying. And he said, to them, that was nothing unusual. They did that all the time. To them, that was just part of a spiritual ritual cleansing. It was a ritual, right? Something they did. And they did it before they went in the temple. They bathed. Before they went in the temple, they would take a bath, they would bathe, and then they would go through this mikveh naked, right? They'd go through this mikveh before they would go into the temple because that was part of their ritual. That was part of their ritual. It was part of a ritual cleansing. 1 Peter 3, what does he say? He says that baptism, remember that? We put the word immersion in there. That sounds a lot better. That immersion that doth now, or now also, see, that depends. See, that's King James coming out of my brain right there. King James still comes out of my brain because I was raised on King James, right? That's what I heard. So when I say something like 1 Peter 3, and I said, the same baptism that doth now also save us. Well, New American Standard doesn't say that. It says the same baptism that now saves us. But, my brain's still stuck in King James. I told Harold when I give him that Greek lexicon, that was a King James lexicon. And I say the problem with the King James or concordance. The problem with the King James concordance is that if you're looking, because concordances, everybody knows what a concordance is, right? You can find any word in the Bible and you can look it up in a concordance and it will tell you every place that word occurs in the Bible. You used to use them. I told Harold, back when I first started preaching before computers, I'd have these things spread out all over the table. The table couldn't hardly hold up the books. These things are so big, right? But the problem is, getting back to the story, the problem is that when you have a King James concordance and you're looking for a word, you got to think King James, because if you think another translation, you're probably going to find the word in there, because, does that make any sense, So anyway, back to where I was. So in 1 Peter 3, he says what? He says the same baptism that also saves us. Then what does he say? He says, not the removal of dirt from the flesh, because to them that's what it was. It was a ritual cleansing, no different than washing a cup, washing your hands, wash your body, right? That's what you had to do. Not the removal of dirt from the flesh, but the answer of a good conscience towards God. So he says the baptism that saves you, the immersion that saves you, is not a ritual cleansing, you see. It's not a Jewish cleansing. The immersion that saves you is the answer of a good conscience towards God. It's not the same immersion. Does that make any sense? Most people don't look at 1 Peter 3 that way because they don't understand contextually what Peter is saying. Because to me and you, we don't think, that doesn't mean anything to us. We don't go into a mikveh before we come into the building, right? It doesn't, but to a Jew, that was totally made sense. It's not a ritual cleansing. It's the answer of a good conscience towards God. In other words, a ritual cleansing is not going to be the baptism that saves you. That's what Peter was saying. So when you put all that kind of together, I know we've been kind of going a lot of ways here tonight. When you put all of that kind of together, then it starts to kind of make sense. So, immersion, baptism, came out of Judaism. You see, it's not a unique Christian experience. It came out of Judaism. So today, if you want to convert to Judaism, right, you're going to get baptized. I ain't going to say that, but you're going to go through a mikveh. And in Judaism, you don't just go through the mikveh to become a Jew. You come through the mikveh at different times in your life as a cleansing. So if you're an Orthodox Jewish woman, you're probably going to go through the mikveh once a month. Every time you come off of your cycle, right? Because in Judaism, a woman who's on her period, on her cycle, is unclean. And she's not to go into her husband, and you're not to sit where she sits, right? Until she's off of her cycle. In an Orthodox Judaism at that time, that woman would go to a mikveh, go to a synagogue, and go through a mikveh, through that cleansing, before she would go back into her husband to have a sexual relation with her husband in Orthodox Judaism. Now, I'm not going to say all Jews do that, because some Jews don't adhere that closely to the law. But Orthodox Judaism, that's the case. Now, the other thing I'm going to tell you, we talk about getting somebody totally under the water when you baptize them, right? I've had to rebaptize people because somebody saw a hand or something come up. So it's a real challenge when you baptize somebody to make sure everything gets under the water. I mean, it's a job. Baptizing somebody is not as simple as it looks. If you've never done it, it's not as simple as it looks. So in Judaism, the rabbi would set, and you can Google this, you can see pictures of this. He's on the opposite side of a wall. The mikveh would be here. The rabbi is on the opposite side of a wall. And when the woman would come into the mikveh, she would disrobe. She goes in naked. She goes naked into the mikveh. He's on the other side of the wall, so he can't see her, but he can see the top of the water. And he's going to make sure that even the tips of her hair are submerged in Orthodox Judaism. Very interesting. So it's very legalistic, right? Extremely legalistic. So well, I guess the point I'm trying to make, in a long-winded way, the point I'm trying to make is that this isn't new, okay? Baptism didn't just pop into Matthew. They were doing this a long time before Jesus ever came to earth. Long time before that. Centuries before that. For a different reason. What I'm trying to get at is, this has been around a long time, okay? We believe in one baptism. Isn't it interesting? Paul says in Ephesians 4, what does Paul say? One Lord, one faith, one baptism. Remember that? One immersion. See, to me and you, we think, well, we take that different. But to a Jew that immerse themselves repeatedly, every time they went into the temple, every time they come off the menstrual cycle, all these other reasons that they immerse themselves, to a Jew, when Paul said one baptism, one immersion, that's a big difference in Judaism than doing it repeatedly, over and over and over and over. The Hebrew writer says what? Jesus Christ came as a sacrifice once to save our sins, right? Once. So that idea of one time, being baptized one time, that's a huge, huge thing in Judaism, you see. Paul, in Acts 19, Paul says, into what baptism then were you baptized? Right? Into what immersion then were you immersed? Remember? And they said, into John's immersion, right? Into John's baptism. And Paul says, John baptized for repentance, right? Looking to the one who is coming after him, and then he immersed them in the name of Jesus, right? So, one baptism. In other words, that John baptism, even though John immersed them, that wasn't going to get it because that wasn't the one. That's not the one, right? So, a lot of stuff here when we talk about it. So, I think I'm done. We'll move on next week, Lord willing.
Could you baptize somebody standing on the outside of that?
Sure. Oh, I can give you a million baptism things if you.
You don't have to both be in the water like they were.
Bible never says you have to both be in the water.
Both went down into the water off the chest.
How legalistic are we going to make this?
I was just asking because, I've seen both ways. Doesn't matter,
Can a woman baptize somebody?
probably.
Why not? I mean, I don't have a reason why not, unless somebody here does. I don't think we have any biblical example of it, but that's a great one, And I guess if you was the only person, I guess you could. I mean, essentially, right? I mean, I don't know. I've heard that my whole life. You're stranded on a desert island and a Bible falls out of an airplane and hits the beach, and you read it and decide you got to be baptized. You're the only person there, and you're going to go to hell because there's nobody there to baptize you. There's a million scenarios when we talk about, baptism. But the truth is, it's not in the person performing the baptism. It's in the person that's being baptized. I mean, plain and simple. I mean, it's in that person, right? I mean, we have to believe that. Otherwise, we would have to vet anybody that baptized you to make sure they were worthy enough to do it, right? And I don't think we have to do that. So it's not in the person that's doing the baptizing. Baptism is a submission to Jesus. It's a covenant. It's entering into a covenant. It's a submission to Christ. It's not just submission to a person. It's just Jesus, God using, man's agency to perform his task, if you want to look at it that way. I don't think directly, but I don't think you can rule it out. I mean, it's just one of those things. 3,000 people were baptized on Pentecost. Some people think that was as many as 6,000. There's a really good chance women were baptizing people. I mean, you can't prove it, but you can't prove it. You can't prove it not either. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you can't prove it either direction. I know I'm always in trouble, but it's okay. I mean, you can take it, you can take the Bible and, you can make it whatever you want to make it, I guess. But if you just take it to be what it says, then, I mean, there's a lot of things like that aren't as clear as we probably want them to be, or maybe we wish they were, I mean, I don't know. If there was, I don't know. I don't really want to get into it, but, I've thought about it. I've thought, what if a mother wanted to baptize her daughter or something like that, I think people would have a problem with it. I think maybe elderships would have a problem with it. I think it depends on where you were. I mean, I don't inherently know that I would have a problem with it. I think it could bother me a little just because, but I don't know that I could say it bothers me because it's wrong, or it just bothers me because it's different. I mean, I honestly can't answer the question. Yeah, I haven't seen it before. I mean, honestly, I don't know that I could answer the question. If I was at a lake somewhere and some girl wanted to, or boy or whatever, child wanted to be baptized and their dad had passed away and it was only their mom and they said, I want my mom to baptize me, I don't think I'd say no. I mean, just honestly, I don't think I have a place to say that. I don't think I have a biblical ground to stand on and say, no, that's wrong, you can't do it. I think it comes down to authority, doesn't it? I mean, if we're putting, is that an authority role? Is she teaching? Is she, I'm not saying what's ever going to happen here. I mean, I'm sure it will never happen here. And I think one of the big reasons is because it would disunify us, if nothing else. Right. It would split us, so we're not going to do it. I mean, that's just one of those things. But if you get right down to it and say, show me why, you know, I think that might just be a deeper discussion, you know, is all I'm saying. I mean, I'm not saying I have the answer, because I don't have the answer. And I'm 100% fine with baptizing. Whoever wants to be baptized, and I'm 100% fine doing it the way we do it. I'm 100% good with it. But I'm just saying that, you know, I think if you want to make the argument for stuff, and you want to make a biblical argument, and you want to have a biblical discussion about it, you know, I don't know. I've never really had that deep a study on it, I guess. But yeah. Well, I think that's true. I mean, you know, and like I said, I think, you know, a lot of stuff we do is because of religious unity, because we want to be together. We want to worship together. We want to be on the same page, you know. And, you know, I think that's something that you always have to be concerned about in a congregation and with people. And you know, and I'm not one to break that mold. You know, I want us to be together. I want us to all be on the same page. I don't want us to be uncomfortable, you know. And I mean, that's why I put on a suit every Sunday morning, Sunday night, because I don't want people to be uncomfortable, you know. And that's why I do a lot of the things I do, you know, and that's how I do it, you know. When I would bring coffee up here to teach class on Sunday morning, we had a guy here who's no longer with us, but who's passed away, not because he's not here, and he came to me and he says, boy, it really bothers me when you bring that coffee down there and set it on the table. And I'm like, so I just quit, you know. I mean, I don't need to drink a cup of coffee. And we've had people that were upset because we put the offering trays on the same table as the communion. You know, we've had that problem, you know, and they said, we don't want them, we think that's wrong to put that offering tray on the same table as the communion. So for a while, we put the offering trays back here on the podium, you know. I guess the point of it is that we all have to be at a place that we all can worship and be comfortable. And if that means we do some things to make that happen, then I'm 100% behind it, if that makes any sense. You know, I don't want to rock the boat. I want us to be together. I want us to love each other. I want us to worship together. I want us to be unified in what we do. I'm not a change agent. I don't want to rock the boat. But when we're in class and we're just asking honest questions and having honest discussion, I got no problem being honest with you, I guess, is what it comes down to, you know. So don't take it wrong, and I certainly don't mean to ever offend anybody. I mean, I'm not going to say we're going to change, because we're not. We're not going to change what we're doing. So, you know, that's just a hypothetical we throw out there, and just take it at that, and be comfortable, you know. We want everybody to be together. That's the big thing. That's the biggest thing. Being together is the biggest thing to me, right? That's what I care about. So, thanks for your time.